Okay. So that's what we will discuss in the controller development. So what are the different, like when we develop a Webdynpro application or Webdynpro component, so we have different controllers in a Webdynpro component, and these different Webdynpro components or different controllers have their own property. Okay, so controller are the main you can say element. Basically, it follows the model view controller architecture. So we will discuss the model view controller architecture in the first unit, and then we will see the controller in the second. Okay, so controller is something that controls the flow of the application. Like when you see a web-based application in your browser, and whenever you do some action on that, so how that action is handled by the your application, so that is implemented within the controllers. Okay, so how that action, user action, which takes place, and how that is processed and how that is handled by the controller, so that is the basic. Okay, and after that, next will be the working with context. So context is something like when you take some when you see an application in the web browser, so there will be some data which you will enter either into your application or which you will see in your application. Okay, so how this data flow and how this data from your web browser goes to your application or your Webdynpro component, so that is implemented to the context. So what is this context and how it stores the data and how it flows from the user interface to the controller? So that is those concepts we will see in this study. Okay. After this, in this next unit, where we see the windows and the views. So basically, when we see a particular application again in the web browser, so when we see an application, it will be basically a combination of different views. And views are nothing but which will actually hold individual user interface elements. So these UI elements are embedded into the views, and views are embedded into the windows. Okay. Then when we see the application, we will navigate from one view to the another view. So these concepts are related to like creating the user interface and how you can set the properties of user interface. So these are the things that we will cover in this particular unit. And the navigation concept. Navigation concept is when you are seeing a particular view and you navigate to another view. So how your action will trigger this navigation and how the flow will go from one view to another. So that is what we will cover in this particular. Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
And after that, the individual UI elements. Basically, we will in the previous units we will see the basic user interface elements like say input box or table, and then we will see some. There are when we see the user Webdynpro application, and when we design the view, so in the view, basically the UI elements are grouped together into different categories. Okay, so these are the different categories that you will see in the component. So basically, there is a category of text user interface elements where you have UI elements into which you can maintain or you can write some text, like you can say input box or text box. So what all we have properties of these UI elements, so we will see these categories. Then as you see next, you see this is action. So action, for example, you can have buttons which will handle the action, and there are other UI elements which are there in the action. Then in the selection, you will have the drop down list, you will have the radio buttons where you can perform the selection out of the available data. Clearly, these different categories we will see, and we will see the properties of the various user interface elements, and we will see how we can control the layout and how we can control the simple application design using these things. Then in the next unit, we will see the component-based development, where we will see how one component can be used in the another component. Like when, as I said, that this whole controller architecture. When we go for model view controller architecture, basically what we do is we will implement it in a modularized form. Modularized form means we will break the application into different individual modules, and individual modules will be developed separately. Okay, so such scenarios, what you do is basically you implement separate components for the individual functionality. Okay, now when you develop a separate component for individual functionality, then there will be requirement that you need one functionality into another component. For example, I'll give a scenario. For example, you are working on some sales order. Now, when you work with sales order, you will require one component for performing to perform the search. Another component you can create where you want to display the overview of a single sales order. Okay. Now, what you will want is you can the requirement can be like when you perform a search, from the result you want to navigate to the overview of the individual sales order. Okay. So in this case, how you will club two Webdynpro components is what we will see. Okay. User interaction. Basically, these are just like add-on topics. Add-on topics like you can say once you have created your input field, then for input field, how you can provide help. Okay. Then how you can create your dialog boxes, how you can display your messages. These are like just to make your application more user friendly and to utilize the additional features of the Webdynpro component. And in the next week, you see that is the dynamic programming. So there, like till now, in the previous units, what you will see is something which we will design within the Webdynpro component. And here, this means we will see that how you can get, how you can work with the dynamic creation of the context or dynamic creation of the UI element. For example, suppose you are having an overview page, and based upon certain conditions, you want to hide some particular field.
How will we be doing this?
Yeah, that's what. So, what we will have to do is basically there are certain methods where we can write the code, check the condition, and dynamically we can modify the view. Dynamically we can modify the view. For example, like that you want to hide the field. So, in one method, you check your condition. Okay, if this is the condition, then modify the view. So, at runtime itself, you will modify your view that remove this particular field from the layout. Basically, for this, what I'll tell you is like these are also methods where you can basically when we have methods, so in methods we will have the importing and exporting parameters. So there are certain framework methods into which there are which are having importing parameters, such that those importing parameters will have all the data about the user interface element. So what you can do is you can write the code in those methods, and you can implement your condition, and based upon your condition, you can modify those importing parameters. So that the field which you want to hide or you want to add, that you can modify. Getting it right?
Yeah.
Similarly, like I said about the, we can modify the view layout. Similarly, we can manipulate the content. For example, you want to add a context at runtime. Okay. Like I said, context is something which will hold the data at runtime between the view and the controller. Now, if you want that at runtime, only you will get the information that what is the structure, or what type of context node you require. In that case, as you do not know it as the implementation language, so you will write the code in the dynamic programming. At runtime itself, you will create the context code and it will use it to the
Okay.
Okay. Next thing what you see is the concept of configuration and adaptation. So this is something like once your application is running, it means once you have developed the Webdynpro component and you can control few settings within the web browser. For example, suppose you are displaying a search and you are displaying a result. Now when you are displaying the result, it will be a tabular format. Now when it is in tabular format, you can control what all columns it will show. So there are two levels of control. One is application level, which will be applicable to all the users who are accessing, and one will be personalization, which will be for a specific user. Okay. If, for example, as a developer, you are implementing the application. Now, when you develop the application, so when your application is in production system, so it will behave uniform across the users, right? So that is something which we call as configuration. But what feature we have in Webdynpro is that as a user, when you access the application, for example, when we talk about Gmail, okay, in Gmail you can personalize the layout according to your choice, right? You have something called settings where you can say that what kind of font it needs to show, what all tabs you want to have. So that is at user level, that is personalization. And something like configuration, that on the header you will see the Gmail search. So that is something which is nothing but that is the configuration that is applicable for all the users. So how we implement these things is what we see. Okay. After that, in this next unit, what you will see is the modification and enhancements. Modifications and enhancements means like whatever we have seen till now, whatever we will cover in the application in the units till now, is something like developing from scratch. Means you are getting a fresh requirement, you are creating a new component, or you are means